The sun was falling, slow and heavy, a dying god bleeding across the desert sky. The horizon burned the color of rust and sorrow, and the world seemed to hold its breath beneath the weight of it. Elias Vance rode through it all, a man stitched together by scars and silence. His horse, a dark mare caked with salt and dust, trudged the last miles like it too had forgotten what rest meant. The wind was dry and sharp, whispering across the bones of the land, stirring up ghosts that didn't stay buried long out here. He carried two things close, a revolver and a letter he hadn't opened in 6 years. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking the valley, dusk had turned the plains below into a living wound. Smoke rose from what used to be a camp. A raid had passed through, soldiers, bandits, or worse. From this far, he couldn't tell, but he could smell it, the mix of charred wood, burned flesh, and something else, something bitter. He dismounted slow, boots sinking into red dust. The world was silent except for the wind and the soft, dying creak of timbers below. The camp was gone. Only a few shapes moved, the wind tugging at canvas, the bones of wagons split open like ribs. He should have turned back. He didn't. Elias walked through the wreckage with the careful steps of a man used to ghosts. There were bodies, settlers, maybe a scout or two. He'd seen worse, but something about this felt off. The dead lay in unnatural poses, faces half-covered, eyes wide. The fire hadn't just taken their camp. It had erased their story. He found her near the edge of the creek. At first, he thought she was dead, just another shape in the ash, wrapped in a blanket of soot and silence. But then she moved, a small, desperate shift, like life refusing to let go. Her hair was black and matted, her skin streaked with blood and earth. Around her neck hung a string of carved bone, Lakota. He knelt, fingers brushing her shoulder. Her eyes opened, dark, sharp, and full of everything the desert wasn't. Water, defiance, fire. "Don't," she whispered, voice raw. "Touch me." He froze. "You're alive." "Not for you," she said. Her words cut like a blade dulled by sorrow. He looked around. The raid had been recent. Whoever did this might still be close. "You're bleeding," he said, more to himself than her. She tried to sit up, but the pain dragged her down again. He tore a strip from his coat, pressed it against the wound in her side. She didn't thank him. She didn't curse him either. "Who did this?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to the horizon. Men with no names. Blue coats. Red scars. Same as always. He nodded. He knew the type. Soldiers gone rogue. Bounty men turned beasts. He'd been one once. "You got a name?" he asked after a moment. She looked at him like the question insulted the dead. "Anya," she said finally. "And yours?" "Elias." "That's supposed to mean something?" He looked at the ground. "Used to." They stayed like that a while. Two strangers sharing the same ruin, the same blood-colored light. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain that never came. Elias wrapped her wound tighter, ignoring the tremor in his hands. "You can walk." She shook her head. "I can crawl. Maybe die slower. Better ways to die," he said. "Name one." "Warm fire. Clean conscience." She gave a hollow laugh. "Then I'm already dead." He helped her up anyway. She leaned on him, stubborn but too weak to protest for long. Together they made for the ridge, her breath sharp and shallow in the quiet. When they reached his horse, Anya looked at it, then at him. "You ride. I walk." He frowned. "That'll kill you." "Maybe it should." He sighed, wiped sweat and ash from his brow. "I'm not arguing. Get on." She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. He lifted her onto the saddle and walked beside the horse, leading it down the narrow trail toward the hills. Behind them, the camp smoldered into nothing, ashes folding into the wind. They didn't speak for a long time. The silence between them was thick, not cruel, the kind that holds two wounded souls in uneasy truce. When the stars finally cut through the smoke, Elias stopped at a dry ravine and built a small fire. The wood hissed like it didn't want to burn. Anya watched him from the edge of the flame, wrapped in a blanket he'd pulled from his saddlebag. "Why help me?" she asked. "Didn't think you'd ask," he said. "I didn't thank you." He smiled, faint bitter. Didn't expect you to. Then why? He poked the fire with a stick, sparks rising like prayers that would never reach heaven. Guess I was tired of watching everything die. Anya looked away. You think saving one life changes that? No, he said quietly. But it's a start. The night deepened. Coyotes howled far off, their cries threading through the silence like distant grief. Anya dozed, but Elias didn't. He watched the fire, the edge of her shadow cast long across the dust. He reached into his coat and took out the letter, the one he'd carried for 6 years. He didn't open it. He never did. The paper was yellowed, corners soft from time and sweat. Anya stirred. That from someone you lost? He looked up, surprised she was awake. Something like that, he said. She wait for you? He gave a humorless laugh. Not anymore. Anya's gaze softened, but she said nothing more. The fire burned low, and with it, the space between them changed. Less of strangers, more of two ghosts learning to share the same silence. Somewhere out in the dark, a raven called, sharp and lonely. Elias looked toward the sound, hand instinctively on his gun. What is it? She whispered. Nothing yet, but he knew better. The desert had a way of remembering sins, and his had never stayed buried for long. He lay back, staring up at the stars bleeding through thin clouds. Each one looked like a wound trying to heal. Anya's voice broke the quiet again, soft this time. You said your name used to mean something. What changed? He hesitated. I stopped believing it did. She studied him through the flicker of firelight, something unreadable in her eyes. Maybe it still does, she said. You just forgot what kind of man you were. Elias turned toward her, but she'd already closed her eyes. The desert wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant rain and burnt cedar. He sat in the silence until dawn began to pale the edges of the sky, that slow, fragile light that makes everything look cleaner than it is. He knew what the sunrise meant. New tracks in the sand, new dangers crawling out of the dark. But as he looked at her, the woman who should have been dead, breathing shallow but steady beside his fire, he felt something he hadn't in years. Not hope, something smaller, quieter, maybe the faint echo of it. Morning came slow and cruel, the kind of dawn that didn't promise mercy, just light. The desert looked different under it, stripped bare of mystery, honest in its emptiness. Elias kicked dust over the remains of the fire, the last curl of smoke rising like a ghost trying to stay in this world. Anya was awake already, sitting near the horse, binding her side with a fresh strip of cloth. The wound had clotted, but pain still lived in her eyes, not the kind that comes from blood loss, the kind that has roots. He watched her a moment before speaking. You'll tear it open if you keep moving like that. She looked up, expression unreadable. And if I don't move, I die slower. He allowed himself a small smile. You've got a sharp tongue. I had to, she said, tightening the knot at her waist. Men listen faster when words cut. Elias saddled the horse in silence. He didn't argue. He'd seen what kind of world made a woman sharpen her words into weapons. By the time they started moving, the sun was already climbing high. The desert stretched endless. Rolling hills of bone-white sand and scrub, the air thick enough to choke. The wind had teeth, biting through fabric and patience alike. Anya rode with her back straight despite the pain. Elias walked beside the horse, hat low, eyes scanning the horizon the way soldiers do when they've forgotten how not to. Hours passed before either spoke again. You said those men wore blue, Elias said finally. Soldiers? She hesitated. They were once. Cavalry. Once, she repeated, the word cracking like old wood. Now, there's something else. Wolves wearing manskin. He nodded. He knew that kind. Men who lost their war, but kept their hunger. How many? 5 that I saw, she said. Maybe more. They took the others, women, children. I don't know where. Elias's jaw tightened. They'll circle back. Raiders like to clean their tracks. Anya's gaze cut to him. Then why aren't we running faster? Because you're bleeding, he said. And I don't run from ghosts unless they're close enough to bite. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not trust either, but something between them. You talk like a man who's already dead. Maybe I am. They rode on. The sun climbed higher, turning everything into one long shimmer of heat. Elias led her to a dried-out arroyo where a few stubborn mesquites still clung to life. They rested there, shade thin as paper. Anya sipped from his canteen, eyes never leaving him. You're not like the others. What others? Men who wear guns and think it makes them gods. He gave a low chuckle. I'm no god. Just a man who's good at ending bad things. That what you call killing? He looked at her, really looked. That what you call surviving? The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. They understood each other in the way only the broken do. Not through confession, but through the quiet acknowledgement of shared ruin. By late afternoon, the heat began to break. Wind picked up, bringing the faint smell of rain that the desert liked to lie about. They followed the dry creek north, past twisted rocks and half-buried bones. Elias stopped suddenly, crouched low. Tracks, he said. Anya leaned down to look, faint impressions in the dust. Not horse hooves. Boots. Heavy ones. How old, she asked. Half a day, maybe less. Yours. He shook his head. Too many. Too wide. They're following the same trail we are. Those men. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Anya's breath hitched. We can't outrun them. No, Elias said, standing. But we can get lost better than they can. He led her off the main trail, cutting through a canyon where the walls narrowed to knife edges. The air grew cooler there, shadows long and dark. Ravens watched from above, their calls echoing like laughter that had forgotten what humor was. They stopped when the canyon widened into a hollow of rock and water. A spring, small but real. Rest, Elias said. Drink. I'll keep watch. Anya crouched by the water, her reflection trembling in the ripples. You ever get tired of saving people? Don't do it often enough to get tired, he said. And the ones you couldn't save? He didn't answer. His silence told her everything. That night, the storm finally came. Not rain, but wind and lightning, a dry tempest that painted the canyon in flashes of white and gold. They huddled near the rock wall, fire small and flickering. The lightning lit her face, the dirt, the bruise beneath her cheekbone, the wild defiance in her eyes. Elias couldn't look away. You staring at something, bounty man? She said, voice low but not sharp. He half smiled. Trying to figure out what kind of storm you are. Anya looked back at the fire. One that doesn't pass easy. The thunder rolled. He leaned back against the stone, pulling his coat. Tighter. You got anyone waiting for you? She shook her head. Not anymore. You. He thought about the letter in his coat, the one that had traveled more miles than his soul had left. No, he said. Just ghosts. The wind howled, sweeping sand into the fire. Anya shifted closer, the edge of her blanket brushing his arm. The warmth between them was subtle but real, fragile as dawn. You ever think the land remembers what we do? She asked suddenly. He looked out at the storm. Yeah, it just don't forgive it. She smiled faintly. Then maybe it's the only honest thing left. They sat there until the thunder moved east and the desert quieted again. When she finally fell asleep beside him, Elias didn't close his eyes. He watched the horizon pulse with distant lightning and thought about how peace never lasted long. Not for men like him. And sure enough, just before dawn, he heard it. A sound faint and steady. Hooves. He stood, cold replacing every trace of fatigue. The horizon was pale gray, the kind of light that made everything look like a memory. He climbed the ridge and saw them. Dark figures moving across the plain, slow but certain. They weren't ghosts. They were men. Anya stirred behind him. They found us. He nodded. Her face hardened. Then we run. He looked at her, at the strength buried beneath the weariness. Run where? The desert's wide, but it doesn't hide you forever. Then we make it remember us, she said, gripping the saddle. Elias smiled, tired, proud, almost something like hope. He swung onto the horse behind her, the wind catching his coat like a tattered flag. The first rays of sun broke through the clouds, painting the desert gold again, too beautiful for the death that followed it. They rode north into the endless light. Behind them, the riders followed, small, dark shapes against the burning sky. Between them, In that fragile space where fear meets courage, something unspoken began to take root. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The desert held its breath before sunrise. The stars still burned cold and hard, but the edges of the world had begun to bruise with light. Wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it a smell Elias knew too well. Horses, sweat, and gun oil. Death was coming. He crouched behind a ridge, spyglass raised. Far off, the riders moved in a slow, deliberate line, 6 now, maybe 7. The kind of men who didn't rush. The kind who hunted like time was on their side. He lowered the glass. They're closer than I thought. Anya was packing the saddle, her fingers shaking only slightly. How far? 2 hours, maybe less. Then we can make the pass. He looked to the north, where the land rose into a tangle of rock and shadow. No, they'll corner us there. That's where I'd set the trap. She met his eyes. You've done this before. Too many times. The sky lightened, washing the world in gray-blue. Elias's horse stamped and snorted, nervous. Even the air seemed to know what was coming. He turned back to Anya. There's a wash about half a mile west. We can hole up there, thick brush, good sight lines. If we're lucky, they'll ride past. And if we're not, then we make our stand. Anya gave a small, bitter laugh. You talk like the land owes you something. He adjusted his hat, eyes narrowing toward the east. It owes me nothing. I just aim to leave my mark before it swallows me. They rode hard, the sun creeping higher, cutting through the chill. By the time they reached the wash, sweat and dust clung to every inch of them. The air smelled of iron, storm, or blood waiting its turn. Elias found a narrow draw beneath a rock outcrop. He dismounted, motioning for silence. Together, they camouflaged the horse with brush, then crouched in the shadows. Time stretched thin. Anya's breathing was quiet, measured. Elias could feel her tension like heat, the kind born from a lifetime of surviving, not living. Finally, the sound came. Hooves. Slow. Deliberate. Elias peeked through the brush. The riders came single file, moving like vultures in men's skin. Blue coats faded to gray, sun-bleached and dirty. One of them had a flag tied to his saddle. Union colors, torn and blackened at the edges. Ghosts of a war that refused to die. Anya's hand brushed his arm, trembling. The one in front, she whispered. That's their leader, Colonel Brandt. Elias studied him. The man rode straight-backed, face hidden beneath a broad hat. The way he carried himself spoke of command, the kind earned through blood and obedience. How long's he been chasing you? Elias asked softly. Since the massacre at Hollow Creek, she said. He killed my brother. Said it was justice. Justice, Elias murmured. That word gets heavier every time I hear it. The column slowed. The lead rider raised his hand. They stopped. Elias tensed. Then Brandt turned his head, not toward Elias, but toward the canyon itself, as if listening to the wind. Come out, girl, he called, voice booming. You think the desert can hide you? You think that bounty hunter will save you? I know his kind. He'll trade your life for a full belly and a quiet conscience. Anya's jaw clenched. Elias felt the heat rise in his blood, not from anger alone, but something older, the recognition of a predator. Brandt's voice carried again. You're not the first to run, and you won't be the last. But I give you my word. I'll make it quick. Elias exhaled slow. He's trying to flush us out. Anya's hand tightened around her pistol. Then let's give him something to find. Elias caught her wrist. Not yet. Their eyes met. The world went silent around them. Then, the crack of a rifle. The bullet hit the rock above them, spraying dust and stone. Too late, Anya whispered. The first exchange was chaos, smoke, thunder, the echo of violence tearing through the canyon. Elias fired once, twice, dropping a rider from his horse. The others scattered, shouting. Anya darted behind the rocks, returning fire with sharp precision. For a moment, Elias forgot she was the hunted. She fought like someone who'd already died once and wasn't afraid to try again. The sky was alive now, a canvas of flame and dust. Bullets screamed through the air. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the desert heat, thick and choking. Elias felt a sharp sting in his shoulder, but didn't stop. He moved like a machine, load, fire, move, breathe. The rhythm of survival. He caught sight of Brant through the smoke, still mounted, barking orders. Elias aimed, squeezed, the shot went wide. The next second, the colonel's rifle flashed, and a slug tore into the rock beside Elias's head. Damn, Elias hissed. Man's got the devil's aim. Anya crawled beside him, blood streaking her arm. Then shoot the devil's heart. He met her gaze, dirt, sweat, and something wild in her eyes, and nodded once. The gunfire slowed. The air grew thick with silence again. That false calm before the storm ends badly. Then Brant called out, voice cutting through the dust. Elias Grady, that you, old hound? Thought you'd be smart enough to stay out of this. Elias froze. He hadn't heard that name spoken in years. You know him? Anya asked, breath ragged. Elias didn't answer. Brant laughed, cruel and easy. I knew you'd crawl out of whatever hole you buried yourself in. Always did have a taste for lost causes. Tell me, what's she paying you? Or is it just the look in her eyes? Anya looked at him. What's he talking about? Elias swallowed hard. Brant and we rode together once. Before I knew what side I was on. Her face hardened. And now, he looked past her, to the horizon where dawn was bleeding into gold. Now I'm trying to find out. Another shot split the air, this one grazing Elias's hat clean off his head. Anya shouted, we can't stay here. He nodded. You ride north. I'll cover you. I'm not leaving you. Wasn't asking. She glared at him, furious and afraid. You think dying makes you noble? That's the coward's way, Elias. Then I've been a coward my whole life, he said, reloading. Go. She hesitated one heartbeat too long, then turned and ran for the horse. Elias rose, firing into the dust, keeping their attention on him. The sound of hooves thundered away behind him. He took cover again, the world shrinking to gunfire and heartbeat. One by one, he counted the echoes, each shot a prairie didn't believe in. Then silence. The smoke drifted. The wind returned. When he finally looked up, the riders were retreating, what was left of them. Brant was still there, though, watching from a distance, eyes cold as the barrel of his gun. He tipped his hat once, not in respect, but in promise, then turned and rode away. Elias stood alone in the aftermath. The canyon smelled of blood and dust. The firelight of dawn spread across the rocks like spilled wine. He pressed a hand to his wound, wincing. The blood was warm, bright. He'd live for now. The horse whinnied somewhere beyond the ridge. He followed the sound, slow, heavy-footed. Anya was there, waiting, eyes wide, breath shuddering. I thought not yet, he said, cutting her off with a weary smile. Not today. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. They stood there as the sun climbed over the desert, burning the world clean again. And though neither spoke it aloud, they both knew the fire at dawn had changed them. There was no turning back now. The night came down heavy, black and absolute, with only the red coals of their fire to hold it back. The canyon had gone silent again, the kind of silence that feels like a hell breath. Wind moved through the dry brush in slow sighs, carrying whispers that could have been ghosts or memory. Elias sat with his back to the stone, shoulder bandaged in rough cloth, every muscle stiff with pain. He hadn't spoken in an hour. The firelight carved deep lines into his face, the kind of lines that came from more than age, from the weight of what you survive. Anya sat across from him, staring into the flames. Her hair hung loose now, tangled from wind and blood. In the light, her eyes looked like they'd seen too much, and maybe wanted to see more. Neither of them had slept. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost tender. You knew him, she said. That man, Brant. You weren't lying. Elias didn't look up. I knew the uniform. The man came later. She studied him for a moment. You fought in the war. He nodded once. I stopped fighting after it. But not before you did things you regret. He gave a dry laugh, one without warmth. That's the only kind of thing I ever did. The fire popped, sending up a spray of sparks. Anya turned her gaze away. My brother thought the same thing once, that the world could be made clean by regret. But regret doesn't wash blood away. Elias watched her closely. Your brother. He was one of them? The ones at Hollow Creek. She nodded slowly. He was a fool. Thought he could reason with the bluecoats. Bring peace. Her eyes darkened. They brought him a bullet instead. I heard about Hollow Creek, Elias said. They called it justice. She laughed softly, bitter, sharp. They always do. Silence settled again, heavy but not empty. It was the kind of silence that made confessions possible. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice low. You asked me once why I chase people for a living. Truth is, I used to tell myself it was for the law, for the money. But it's not. She looked up. I do it because every time I put someone in the ground, he said, I feel like I'm burying the man I used to be. Anya's expression softened. And how's that working out for you? He managed a faint smile. Poorly. She got up, walked to him, and crouched close enough that the firelight danced across her cheekbones. She reached out, brushed her fingers against the bandage on his shoulder. You could have let me go, she said. Saved yourself all this. I tried, he murmured. Didn't take. Her hand lingered there. You think you can save me now? Elias met her gaze, the question hanging between them like smoke. I don't even know if I can save myself. Her breath caught. For a long second, the world shrank to nothing but that space between them. Firelight, heartbeat, and the ache of something dangerous being born. Then, from far off, a sound broke the stillness. A rifle crack. Elias was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn. The sound echoed across the canyon walls. A single shot, but too close to mistake. Anya's face hardened. They found us. Elias scanned the ridgeline. No, not all of them. Just one. A scout, maybe. He turned back to her. Stay here. She grabbed his arm. You can't take him alone. I'm not taking him. I'm warning him. Elias. He didn't wait for her to finish. The desert night swallowed him whole. He moved through the dark like a shadow. Slow, silent, deliberate. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it had this morning. The moonlight washed the world in silver and ash. He could see the figure ahead, crouched among the rocks, watching the campfire below. Young, too young to know how to die right. Elias crept closer, raised his rifle, and spoke softly. Put it down, son. The boy spun, startled, clumsy, rifle swinging toward Elias. The report came fast. Elias fired first. The boy dropped, a single cry escaping his throat before the silence rushed back in. Elias approached slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The boy lay half-turned, breath shallow, eyes glassy with fear. Couldn't have been more than 16. Maybe less. Elias knelt beside him. The wound was deep, fatal. The boy whispered something. Elias leaned close. What was that? The boy's voice trembled. Colonel, said you'd come back, said you'd finish what you started. Elias froze. Finish what? He whispered. The boy's lips moved again, but the words were lost in his last exhale. Elias sat there for a long moment, staring at the body. Then he took the boy's badge, a small, bent piece of tin, and closed his eyes. When he returned to camp, the fire had burned low. Anya was waiting, her pistol drawn. Well, she asked. He's dead. Her eyes searched his face. How bad? Elias hesitated. Young. Too young. She lowered her weapon slowly. They'll come for him. When they find the body, they'll follow the tracks. Elias nodded. I know. She looked at him a long while, then said quietly, You killed another man to protect me. He didn't answer. Why, Elias? She pressed. You don't owe me anything. You don't even believe in me. He looked up at her, eyes haunted. You're wrong. I believe in you more than I believe in anything left in this world. Anya stared at him, the firelight trembling between them. You don't even know who I am. I know what I see. And what's that? A woman who's been running so long she forgot where she started. She laughed, but her voice cracked. You think there's redemption for someone like me? Elias stepped closer. Maybe not, but maybe there's mercy. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something more fragile. Hope, the dangerous kind. He reached for her hand, but before he could speak, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of riders. Anya's breath hitched. They're here. Elias turned toward the dark horizon, jaw tight. The world around them glowed faintly with dawn again, the color of smoke and dying stars. He holstered his gun. Then the devils come to collect. She looked at him, voice trembling. What do we do? He smiled, grim and tired. We make him work for it. They set the last of the dynamite at the canyon mouth, hiding the fuses beneath rock. Elias checked his revolver. 5 rounds left. Anya stood beside him, hand steady now. When the first riders appeared, their torches flickering like angry stars, Elias whispered now. The canyon erupted in fire. The blast tore through the ground, sending rock and flame skyward. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Chaos in every direction. Elias fired into the smoke, methodical, relentless. Anya fought beside him. Every shot a confession, every breath defiance. When the dust cleared, only one rider was left standing. Colonel Brandt. He walked through the wreckage, coat singed, eyes burning with something beyond hatred. Well, he said, voice calm, you've done it now, Grady. Killed your own men, all for her. Elias's voice was raw. They were never mine. Brandt smiled. That's where you're wrong. You don't get to wash your hands, boy. Not after what we did. Anya looked between them, confused. What's he talking about? Brandt stepped closer. Didn't he tell you? He was with us at Hollow Creek. Rode under my command when we burned your camp. He lit the first torch. Anya froze, her eyes going wide. No, Elias's throat tightened. Anya, she stumbled back, shaking her head. Tell me it's a lie. He couldn't. Brandt laughed. The cruel sound of a man who knew the truth always wins. Go on, boy. Tell her how Mercy felt when you set fire to it. Elias's voice broke. I didn't know. Not until it was done. Anya's face twisted, grief, rage, heartbreak all at once. You kill my brother. I tried to stop it. She raised her pistol, hands trembling. Don't. The air between them went still. Brandt stood watching, almost smiling. There it is. The devil's mercy. Elias looked at her, not pleading, not afraid. Just tired. If you're going to do it clean. Anya's finger tightened on the trigger. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and something broke inside her. She dropped the gun. Brandt drew his own. Elias moved first. The 2 shots came as one. When the echo faded, Brandt lay face down in the dirt, blood soaking the sand. Elias stood swaying, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Anya caught him as he fell. Elias. He looked up at her, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Guess there's mercy after all. Don't you dare, she whispered. Don't you dare leave me now. He touched her cheek, fingers trembling. You were right. Regret don't wash blood away. But maybe love does. His hand fell. His eyes stilled. The sun crested the ridge, red, merciless, eternal. Anya sat there, holding him as the desert wind rose around her, carrying away the last smoke of their war. The dawn after death was always the same. A silence so heavy it pressed against the ribs, the kind that made every heartbeat sound like a sin. The desert had turned gold again, stretching endlessly beneath a sky too wide to care. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder and blood, but also something softer, sagebrush, rain far away, the faint echo of a world that refused to stop turning. Anya knelt beside Elias's body. His face looked younger now, the lines of guilt smoothed by stillness. The world had taken everything from him, and in return, it gave him peace. Her hand shook as she brushed dust from his coat, whispering words too small for the wind to hold. I should hate you, she said. I should curse you for every ghost you gave me. Her voice cracked. But I can't. The horse shifted nearby, uneasy. Crows circled above, patient knowing. She took a deep breath and stood, wrapping his coat around his chest. The blood had dried dark against the fabric. You wanted to be buried, she murmured, but not forgotten. She dug the grave herself, slow, stubborn work beneath a sun that refused mercy. The ground was hard, the shovel dull, her hands blistered and torn. But she didn't stop, not once. By the time she finished, the sun was high and cruel. She laid him down gently, one hand resting on his chest. Elias Grady, she whispered. Killer. Sinner. Fool. The only man who ever looked at me like I was still worth saving. The wind stirred again, tugging at her hair. It almost sounded like an answer, the faint echo of his voice in the emptiness. She took his revolver, holstered it at her side, and turned toward the horizon. Redwater was 3 days' ride west. Beyond that, nothing but the unknown. The first night alone was the worst. The stars came out one by one, cold, distant witnesses. Every flicker of firelight brought his face back to her, the way he'd smiled through pain, the way his voice had softened when he said her name. She couldn't eat, could barely breathe. The guilt gnawed at her, not just for him, but for herself, because deep down, she knew that part of her had wanted it to end this way. The fire, the blood, the redemption. She dreamed of him that night, not as the killer, not as the man who had burned her world, but as he was beneath the canyon sky, quiet, broken, trying. In the dream, he said only one thing. Don't let them tell my story for me. She woke before dawn, tears drying on her cheeks. The fire had gone cold. By the third day, she reached the edge of the desert. Civilization, if you could call it that, rose out of the heat like a mirage. A trading post, a half-empty saloon, and a rail line that cut through the dust like a scar. The bartender looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her. Dirty, hollow-eyed, wearing a man's hat too big for her head, and a revolver she clearly knew how to use. Long row, miss? He asked. Longer than most, she said. He nodded toward the notice board by the door. Paper came in yesterday. Got her kind of stories on it. She walked over, boots echoing on the warped floorboards. There, tacked to the wood, was a new bounty poster, the ink still fresh. Elias Grady, 500 dead, no alive. No redemption. Her hands clenched. The lies lived longer than the truth ever did. She turned to the bartender. You got a pen? He nodded, handed her one. She took it and crossed out the line where it said dead. Then she wrote beneath it, in firm, unshaking letters, he died saving the only thing that ever mattered. When she stepped back, the saloon had gone quiet. The bartender said nothing, just stared at her like he wasn't sure what kind of ghost he'd let in. She left without another word. Weeks passed. The land softened into green, the rivers fuller now after the rains. Anya rode until she couldn't anymore, until the sound of the desert faded into memory. She found work at a small chapel on the edge of nowhere, sweeping floors, tending candles, mending olden books. The preacher was blind in one eye and didn't ask questions. For that, she was grateful. At night, she'd sit by the window and look at the stars. Sometimes she'd hum the tune Elias used to whistle without thinking. Other times, she'd just sit in silence, hands clasped, lips moving in prayers she didn't believe in. People came and went, confessions whispered into the air. But she never stepped into the booth herself. Some sins were meant to be carried, not forgiven. Still, she found herself lighting a candle every morning. Always one. Always for him. Not because he'd been a saint. Because he'd tried to be. One evening, months later, a traveler stopped by the chapel. Dust on his boots, hat in hand. You the caretaker here? He asked. Anya nodded. Found something down south, he said, reaching into his coat. Figured it belonged to someone. He handed her a small object, tarnished silver, worn smooth with time. A locket. When she opened it, a single photograph lay inside. Faded but unmistakable. Elias. Younger, smiling, before the world had decided who he was supposed to be. Inside the lid, scratched in with a knife, were 3 words, find your peace. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed her hand around it. Thank you, she said softly. The traveler tipped his hat and left, his shadow stretching long into the twilight. That night, she lit another candle, brighter, stronger. She placed the locket beside it. The wind outside was gentle, warm. The stars above, patient. She whispered into the quiet. I found it, Elias. Not the kind you'd think, not the kind that saves. Just the kind that lets me breathe again. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. The world outside kept on turning. Sun to dusk, dusk to dawn. Somewhere out there, maybe in the shifting dust, the spirit of a broken gunslinger finally rested. The desert, at last, had given back what it took.